Well, good afternoon to you all, and welcome to We Were There. Before I forget later, let me wish you all a Happy New Year. For everyone in this room, I guarantee you it will be a wonderful year, okay? My name is Judith Pucci. I am a Tribute Center walking tour guide, and this afternoon you're going to hear stories from two of my fellow guides. These stories go beyond the historic events of September 11th. Instead, they focus on the personal costs of that day. So let me introduce you to your two storytellers today. Next to me are Jennifer Crawford and Connie Magnus. Connie is a retired New York City police officer. She is a detective sergeant. After the attacks, she was assigned to the medical examiner's office as a Detective Bureau morgue supervisor. Jennifer's father was a New York City firefighter. One of 5 children, her 2 brothers also volunteer at the Tribute Center and have told their stories here at the museum. But we're going to begin with Connie, who happened to have been off duty that day, but who, like so many other first responders, once she heard what was happening, she rushed here to the Trade Center to be of help. All yours.
Thanks, Judy. Hello, everyone. As Judy said, my name is Connie Magnus. I was off that day, so I watched the events unfold on TV like many of you. But as a New York City police officer, we have a thing called a automatic recall. Something bad happens, we have to get in, no matter what. So I live in a suburb of New York City, about 40 miles away in Long Island, and I had to drive in. So I'm thinking, what am I going to be doing when I get here? As Judith said, I was a detective sergeant in the Detective Bureau, so we usually investigate crimes after they happen or as they happen. I'm sure many of you watch, who watches Law and Order in here? Okay, everybody watches Law and Order. So I'm like Liv in the Special Victims Unit. I'm the sergeant in charge of people there. So that's, that's my job. But I knew that day my job was going to be very, very different. So on my drive-in, which was an unusual drive-in in itself, you've been in New York City, you see all the traffic. Imagine driving in and there is no traffic. They had all the state troopers had the roads closed going into New York City. So if you were coming in from Long Island or Westchester County, counties outside, once you got to the city line, there was no traffic. Unlike popular belief is that all cops have cars with the bubble on them and the sirens. I had a 92 Saturn that I had to stick my shield out the window so they would let me drive through. But what was running through my mind was, what was I going to do when I got here? And it took me back to when I was a rookie police officer in Coney Island, which is in Brooklyn, right through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel there, or over the Brooklyn Bridge. And Coney Island is a beach area. So as a rookie officer, when you work at the beach, you find a lot of lost kids. And, they're usually very upset. They don't know where mommy or daddy is. And so you want to try to calm them down so you can find mommy or daddy. So whenever I got the lost kid, I would say to them, you're not lost. You're right here. You're found. It's your parents that are lost. And I would calm them down, and I could find where mommy and daddy might have been on the beach and return them to them. And that's when I learned very young in my career that one of the most rewarding things you could do as a cop is bring people's families home to them. You're the most precious thing to them. And that's when I knew what I was going to do. That's when I knew I was going to volunteer to be one of the supervisors at the morgue, because I knew that's where we were going to find people and bring them home. I knew that 210-story buildings falling down, there weren't going to be many people that were alive. So as I got in, I came to the site and stood where the Marriott Hotel was and looked around, and we thought potentially at that time we had 10,000 people gone. But I said to my coworkers and everybody that was with me, I said, we're going to find everyone. I have no doubt whatsoever. With my skills, the police department, the New York City Police Department, the detectives I had working for me, we were going to find every single person. Turns out we realized we had about 3,000 people missing. But I still said, I don't know if anybody's seen any of the pictures of the devastation yet, but if you saw what it looked down here, it does not look like what it looked now. And even seeing all of that, I said, we're going to find everybody. I had no doubt in my mind. So we started working right away. We started identifying people, recovering people, making notifications. That was very difficult, making those notifications. But you saw the gratitude on people's faces that you brought their loved one home. One that particularly stands out in my mind is a young police officer called me on the phone, and she said, you know, Sarge, my aunt got a call that they found my uncle, to come down to the medical examiner's office so that she could, you know, identify and, you know, recover his remains, but they didn't say what they found. And then there was a long pause on the phone, and I said, well, officer, you're the one who's going to be the strength for your family here today. I said, so I'm going to tell you what we found. I said, but you have to remember you're bringing your aunt here, and you have to prepare her for that. And then I told her that we had found her uncle's arm in his hand, and he was identified through his fingerprints. And then there was another long pause on the phone. And I wasn't sure if she was still there. I was like, officer, you still with me? She goes, yes, ma'am, I am. I said, remember, you're going to be the strength for your family. And even though that notification was probably one of the hardest ones I had to do, I still heard the gratitude in her voice and her family's voice. So now, this was going on for days. I worked at the morgue from September 11th until April the following year. But as the days were going by, I was collecting lists of people that were missing, not just the police department, the fire department, the Port Authority, and everyone on the planes, but everyone who worked in the buildings. And if you go outside in the Memorial Plaza, one of the things that gets to me a little bit when I come here is seeing all those names, because I know all those names. I've seen all those names all the time. And that's who I was looking for. So as the days were going by and I'm compiling my list, people are coming, you know, to the medical examiner's office with information. We wanted any information on who was missing, any little thing about the person. And it was becoming a little more personal for me, not just because I had friends and colleagues that I lost that day, but friends who had family that worked there that I lost that day. And then just the multitude of people who came, it became personal for me, because I was going to find every single person. Remember, I had no doubt. So they would come in, with whatever they had. You know, Pam had short, spiky hair. You know, he had a Yosemite Sam tattoo on his hip. Oh, he was wearing my mother's clatter ring. Or, Connie, it's my twin brother that's missing. But all that information that I got, I put on some yellow sticky notes. Everybody knows what the yellow sticky notes are. And I would write everything they told me, the person's name, whatever information. And I would put them on a wall behind me in this little office I had at the medical examiner's office. And it kind of started looking a little serial killerish. You know, I had all these notes on the wall. But that was my motivation every day, to find everybody. And a really good day for me was when I got to take one of those sticky notes off the wall, because that means we found somebody and brought them home. So now as the days were turning into weeks and the weeks were turning into months, I was noticing that those notes weren't coming off the wall as quickly as I would like. And what made me realize was probably sometime in February or March where something hit me was that I had a friend, Maureen, who was a detective in the police department. She was missing her brother. He was a firefighter. And she would come in every week, you know, and say, you know, Connie, did they find anybody in his company, any gear of his? He had a special rope that he wore with a double loop on it. If you find that, that's his. And every week I would have to tell her, no, we haven't found anything yet, but we're not going to stop looking. We're not. And it wasn't until about March when she came in one day, when I looked behind me and I saw all those sticky notes on the wall still, and she asked me about them again, and I realized, you know, I said to her, Maureen, we'll never stop looking, but I don't know if we're going to find them. And that's when it hit me that, you know, this is going to be a hard way to go. We might not find everybody here. So I said to myself, what are we going to do? Right now, we still have 40% of people we haven't found and recovered. But then I said, you know what? It went back to that finding the kids in Coney Island. The people we lost that day, they're not lost. They're right here. The people who are lost are us. I'm a little lost. The families are a little lost. We're still losing people today to the effects of 9/11. Somebody goes every week. I'm sure you all saw that in the news with the Zajoga bill. So that's why I do this. So people remember what happened that day, that people are mindful that we're still lost, the people who are still here are still lost. And by you coming here and you recognizing what happened here that day, that makes us feel that we're not so lost. So I thank you for coming down. And I'm going to give it back to Judy.
Connie just told you that 40% of the people who died have not been identified. What she is referring to is the people who died here at the World Trade Center that morning. 40% of them, we know who they are. That number comes to a little over 1,100 people. Their names are on the memorial, but their physical remains are deteriorated to a point that is beyond the current reach of DNA technology. That technology is ever advancing. 2 major steps forward have been taken because of the demands of September 11th. This is why even 14 years later, after the attacks, identifications continue to be made. They are made very slowly. So far, they have been made annually. Whether that will continue going forward, we do not know. But the most recent identification was Matthew Yarnell, 26 years old, from New Jersey. Finally, his remains could be returned to his mother. Like Connie, Jennifer's father was here at the Trade Center that day. And like every firefighter that I have ever spoken to, he loved what he did. He loved his job, and he did that job with honor for over 32 years. So now Jennifer is going to talk to you about him.
I would just like to say thank you all for coming. This is very important that people know the stories of the people who were killed here. I am a fireman's daughter. On September 11, 2001, I learned about plane crashing into the Twin Towers. I took my daughter Alexandra, 3.5, and my son Justin Robert, 6 months old, to Toys R Us on Flatbush Avenue because from that vantage point, there was a clear picture of the towers. As I drove into the parking lot, I saw the building to my left, a huge hole and just smoke pouring out of the building. And I was just very scared, very anxious, but I was more scared because my father is a firefighter. I immediately called my father's cell phone. There was no answer. I called the house. There was no answer. I called the safety battalion. There was no answer. I immediately went to my father's home. He wasn't there. I went in the house, and his cell phone was left on the table. So again, I know this is not a good thing. As the weeks started to pass, I guess you could say obsessively, I would make phone calls daily, 5 to 10 phone calls per day. I would call the fire department, hospitals, the police department, the phone company. I was calling anybody and everybody to try to locate my father, to just find where he was. And not one person could give me any answers. My father was the person that I would go to when I had a crazy question. He always had the answer. I would say, hey, Dad, I need to know what this is. He's like, here you go, kid, here's the answer. I have all of these questions, and nobody has any answers for me. One particular day, I had called a hospital, and I got this nurse on the phone, and I started to describe my father to her. And I just started crying. And in the midst of me crying, this poor nurse on the other end of the phone is now crying. And between the both of us, I just become so distraught that I cannot even finish this conversation. My husband still happened to be home, and I just handed him the phone, and I was like, you have to speak to this woman. I can't do it. That was the last phone call that I ever made. Another time, I went down to Pier 94. And I went there to actually pick up an urn. So I go into Pier 94, and they give me this form to fill out. So I'm sitting there, and I'm reading this form, and I have to write my father's name, my relationship to him, and it hits me that, like, this is it. Like, this is it. It hits me that, you know, my father is not coming back. While I'm at Pier 94, I'm presented with an urn, and this woman comes up, and she's wearing white gloves, and she has a letter from the President of the United States. And she hands me this letter, and I'm like, the President didn't know my father, but I'm getting this letter from him. So I have the letter in one hand, and I have the urn in the other hand, and all I can think of is, this is what I have left of my father, an urn and a letter. That's it. We have a memorial service for my father, and then on December 1st, 2001, we bury him. It's 70 degrees, December 1st. It's a beautiful day, and my heart is broken. A few weeks after the funeral, I'm in the house, and you know, my daughter's playing, and you know, my son was playing as well, and my daughter had this kit of Play-Doh flowers. So she said, Mom, can I make these for Pa? I said, of course. I said, you can make these for Pa, and then we'll bring them and we'll leave them for him. And she's like, what do you mean? I'm like, you can make the flowers, and we'll bring them and we'll leave them for him. So now she starts screaming at me. And this was totally out of her character. She is always very positive and happy, never has a bad thing to say, never is yelling. And I'm just looking at her, and she's like screaming. Are you telling me that Pa is dead? That he died? That he's dead? And I'm just standing there like, yes. She's like, but you told me that he went to heaven. And I said, yes, when you die, that's where you go. You go to heaven. So now she's crying, I'm crying. She's angry, I'm angry. We're both really angry, and I'm standing there looking at a 3.5-year-old child, and I'm just like, you know, what do I do? I myself don't know. So how do I explain it to this little girl? The next morning, I'm in the kitchen, I'm feeding my son. My daughter's getting ready to go to school, and when she was little, I used to put her hair in a little ponytail on the top of her head. And whenever she would walk around and, you know, would be bouncing, and, you know, she's just a very bubbly person, always happy. And she's like, come downstairs. She's like, all right, I'm going to school. I said, okay, have a good day. I'll see you later. And she's going out the door, and she turns around, and matter-of-factly, she says to me, she says, oh, Mama, I just want to let you know, last night, Pa slept with me, and he told me, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. So now I look at my daughter, and I'm like, oh my gosh, trying not to, you know, lose it. She leaves. I'm like, oh my goodness. And then I remember a phrase my father used to tell me a lot, because I used to give him a lot of trouble here and there. And, you know, kids do that to their parents. They give them trouble here and there. But my father would say to me, stop your jackassing around. So after my daughter tells me of her dream, I said, now, I know what I need to do. The pieces of my life that have been broken, I need to start to pick them up and put them back together again. Firefighter Robert James Crawford, you will never be forgotten. Thank you.
I had a grandmother who would say, "Don't behave like a horse's tail." I'm going to give you a number which you may be familiar with already. It's 343. That is the number of active duty New York City firefighters who were killed that morning. They were not alone. 23 New York City police officers dead. 37 Port Authority police dead. September 11th is not only the worst loss of first responders in a single event in this city's history, but it is so in United States history. It was just a breathtaking loss then, and it remains breathtaking today. We always leave time at the end, and we leave time because we would very much like you to feel comfortable enough to ask questions. So this becomes more of a dialogue. So please just take a moment, collect your thoughts, and then we'll begin. Okay, that's it. Who's going to be bold and brave? Who is first?
Come on, somebody has to have a question.
There you go. It's a detective sergeant talking to you.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, right over here. Let's start here.
Thank you, firstly, for both sharing your stories. I was just wondering, in terms of the logistics of going through the recovery process, which is the huge amounts of rubble and whatnot, if you could just perhaps talk us through some of the logistics of how that actually happened.
Great question.
I tell everyone it was kind of like organized chaos. The police department, the fire department, all the emergency services. Have we dealt with building collapses? Yes. Have we dealt with large fires? Yes. We've even dealt with plane crashes. But imagine all that in one site. And then with the amount of rubble, 210-story buildings falling down, leaves a lot of rubble, as you can see in some of the pictures there. We learned a lot of new things, the police department and the fire department, on how to deal with that. But it was tedious work at first. The site was a very dangerous site. Fires burned for more than 5 months here. Things were very hot. My first night down here, I was standing 4 stories on top of the collapsed Marriott Hotel, and my shoes melted on the bottom. I had to come off of the pile, as they say. At first, things were done by hand, and then with the help of construction workers, like her brother, and iron workers. And her other brother's a lieutenant in the police department, too. So, it was a banding together of everyone in this city. It was one of the worst things that happened and one of the best things that happened, because I never saw such greatness in people who just wanted to help. Whether it was a sanitation worker, a construction worker, an iron worker, an old lady who brought cookies for us or some water. It started by hand, then we got some machines in where we could, when it started to become safe, and we had engineers coming down here, people who actually built the original trade center were called down here, building engineers, so because we had other collapses that went on. That's why it took so long to clear everything out. It wasn't really cleared out until the following May, when the last beam we actually cut down from the building. All of that debris was taken to a landfill in Staten Island, where everything was gone through. Every bit of debris that was collected, put on trucks, brought to the Staten Island landfill. It's a big landfill that's out there. And we had detectives who were suited up in safety suits, going through that debris, finding human remains, finding property. Many of the people who are getting sick today are those detectives and cops that worked over in the landfill, going through all the debris that was down here. Because there was no glass. If you came down here, it was very surreal. You saw no furniture. There was no glass. There was no computers, what you would expect in an office building. All you saw was concrete, dust, and steel. So that's what had to be gone through. But it was a long process. So I hope I answered your question.
It took just shy of 9 months to do all of what Connie just described to you. Who else?
Come on, all these people. There we go.
So thank you both, by the way, very much. You mentioned that some of the remains are still being identified, so is that site in Staten Island still active?
No, actually that's been closed down. Any human remains that were recovered were at the office of the chief medical examiners. It's up on 32nd Street, the medical examiner's office. Then they've brought the remains that, everything has been tested so far. What we've been able to identify have been returned to the family. What hasn't been identified yet, those remains are actually here in the Memorial Museum in a separate place that the public doesn't get to see. If family members want to come down, they call up and there's a private room that they can go into. They're in sealed, climate controlled boxes, if you will, where they'll be kept, and if DNA gets better, they'll be identified. Like Judith said, we've identified a few people in the last year. We average maybe 1 or 2 identifications a year, but it's a very slow process because DNA, 14 years ago, a lot different than it is now. So hopefully, my hope is that everyone gets identified and brought back to their family. Over 21,000 human remains were recovered from this site. It was an explosion, so, there was a lot of human remains. Might have only been a little under 3,000 people, but we had a lot of human remains that we recovered. So it's an ongoing process that hopefully won't end.
Was there one other question right here? Oh, I thought I saw a hand before. Anyone else? Oh, please, yes.
First of all, I want to praise the Lord for your dedication, and I want to thank that you've done a wonderful job. That's
Thank
my
you.
first comment.
Thank you.
Second, I was asked by the mayor's office to do some analysis of the event. Part of that analysis was the type of aircraft they used. They used a 767 as opposed to a 757. The reason they used that, Al-Qaeda used it, it had 5 times the amount of fuel on it than the 757. The second is, you'll note that the plane did not come in parallel to the ground, it came in at an angle. The 767 took out 1 more story than the 757 would have taken out. So there was an intention here that was terrible to know about, but that was the way in which they strategically examined the superstructure and our institutions which we have. But I want to commend all 3 of you for doing such a wonderful job in this ceremony and the service and all the dedication you've done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. If your intention is to create the maximum amount of damage physically to buildings and carnage to people, yes, you do pay attention to the most jet fuel you can possibly hold in an airplane, the type of plane that will take out more floors than another type. Yeah. That's very interesting information. Thank you for sharing it. I would like to just, before you all go, just say one last thing to you, which is I would like to thank you on behalf of all of us here and everyone at the Tribute Center. Thank you, yes, of course. You chose to spend some of your time with us today, and that is much appreciated. But thank you also because you are essential to our storytelling. It is with you that we take a piece of a brutal and obscene day, and by doing what we have just done, by sharing it together, we make from that a life-affirming experience. And for that, we thank you deeply. Again, Happy New Year to you all.